I've come here to look at your brain.
All right, let me just put a bit of makeup on my brain.
So Antimo's brain should look something like this. Oh, my bad. I mean, something like this.
The brain is a very complex thing with many different components interacting between each other.
Keep in mind that Antimo is playing the lower parts of the piano, and you can hear that there's a lot going on in the lower parts in this section. Well, there's a lot of motor activity, a lot of planning, a lot of hearing going on in Antimo's brain in that section. And that is in the concentration wavelength of alpha brainwaves. This brain activity could also be related to head movements that would create a bias in the signal.
Music is a multi-sensory experience. Playing an instrument uses both sides of the brain, builds attention, concentration, memory, and verbal skill. So when I say the whole brain is being activated and is interconnected, this is a visual representation of that specific phenomenon. You can see that every single little color block here has a different connection to a different color block, where each color block represents a brain region. So for instance here, we'll focus on the frontal areas, the superior frontal gyrus, or alternatively here in the temporal region, the middle temporal gyrus. Here the Heschel's gyrus, very important for auditory processing. Get the picture. Sono arrivato per guardare il tuo cervello.
Okay, il mio cervello, thank you very much for coming. And
the brain is a very complex thing with many different components interacting between each other. But if we delineate the brain by different frequency regions, ranges or bands, like the delta, the beta, the alpha, the gamma, we are better able to analyze its inner clockworks. So separating the brain into different frequency ranges is similar to how we can separate a string orchestra into its different instruments. In a string orchestra, you have the double bass, the cellos, the violas, and the violins. Here in this experiment where Antimo is improvising on the piano as his brain activity is being recorded, we are focusing on the alpha brainwaves, which is analogous to the violas. The violas are above the cellos and below the violins. And so, if you look at this activity, this is actually my brain activity as I slept during one night. This is the string orchestra. And you can see that the string orchestra, there are moments where there are large bursts of energy, which are called sleep spindles. While you sleep, these bursts of energy, and they are characteristic of specific frequency ranges. Here we've separated that string orchestra into its different frequency ranges, and you can see here alpha, the pink signal, and sigma both contribute to this burst of energy. Let me give you another example. Here, it's again my brain activity during that night as I slept. You see here the string orchestra having another crescendo. In this crescendo, however, the violas are not contributing. The alpha brainwaves are not contributed to this crescendo. So you understand, we're just focusing on the violas in this experiment, the alpha brainwaves. Back to Antimo's brain.
In our study, we use something
similar to this one. This is an EEG cap, and the output would look like this in the 19th century, but nowadays we can actually look at it on a computer during the improvisation. Hans Berger in 1929 invented the electroencephalography. This example of machine is from 1958, and every single squiggly line here represents electrical activity coming from one electrode placed in a different part of the head of the skull.
Cerebral function monitor, or CFM. Probably the most important function of the monitor is to help doctors decide on the state of a patient who has suffered a cardiac arrest or brain damage due to an accident. Used with the EEG, it helps hospital staff to make an accurate diagnosis of irreversible damage to the brain.
So the age of computers being able to compare digital brainwaves to previous digital brainwaves, this sort of device would allow doctors to see whether a brain measurement was irreversible brain damage or can survive. And based on this, doctors would decide whether they need to resuscitate a patient.
In this moment of hesitation, I should pull the plug.
Back to Antimo's brain.
There you go, you saw Antimo's brain go fully activated and low activated.
And this is a representation when this happens to you. So here you can see a big part of what's called the executive functioning is missing because of a massive pole that went through your cranium. This guy's a famous case called Phineas Gage. He survived, but he changed. He no longer looks like this.
In the 19th century, that was the best way they could understand the brain. They didn't have any EEG. But how does an EEG work?
What do you think? Could this be my new haircut? This is a visual representation of one neuron and all of its connections done by this man, Ramon y Cajal, one of the founders of modern neuroscience, Ramon y Cajal. He was one of the first to draw out a neuron, and this is one of his drawings. So whenever you see all of these connections between brain regions, each brain region has loads of these that are interconnected between each other. When you're observing these little squiggly lines, it's an accumulation of what's happening between several regions, which is an accumulation of electrochemical activity happening here. There's a visual representation of a brain region. You see each different color is a different neuron, as indicated here. Fluorescent tags are used to illuminate the individual neurons based on their function. So let's imagine that you want to measure the activity of a car. You can measure its velocity, its acceleration, and that will be the overall activity, just like these squiggly lines represent the changes and variations of velocity or acceleration if we're talking about the car. But that car is made of several parts. It has an engine, braking system, a steering system, roof, etc. And all these different parts are combined in the measure of the velocity and the acceleration. Similarly, how these would represent all the different parts of the car. To take the analogy further, this frontal region would be more likely to be the braking and the steering system. The limbic regions would better represent the engine, the motivation, the drive with its dopaminergic and reward system. So when we're measuring the squiggly lines with EEG, electroencephalograph cap, we are measuring the overall activity of the car, the velocity and the acceleration. We're not looking at the individual parts of the car. I'm here in front of the Neuromusic conference that happens every 3 years, an exclusive conference just on neuroscience and music. But we're not going to go into detail. I just want to summarize a bit of what we've gone through in this video. We started just by talking about Antimo's brain, then into whole brain activation of his brain while he was playing. We then talked about how music is a multi-sensory experience and that it can fully interconnect the brain. And then we went into the frequency delineation of the brain, how we can separate the brain into different frequencies and tackle the brain's complexity. We did an analogy to string orchestras. Frequency analysis is similar to string orchestras. Then we came back to Antimo's brain. We experienced Antimo's improvisation and saw his brain being activated on the sides with a bit of labeling indicating what was happening during improvisation and in Antimo's brain activity. Then we tackled the history of EEG, a brief history of EEG, and how EEG was and is used for clinicians and doctors
We touched on Phineas Gage, one of the first steps in understanding the brain. And then we looked at how EEG captures brain activities, its principles and concepts. Finally, we took a look at a car analogy for understanding how EEG works. If you found this interesting, make sure to leave comments with any of your questions about any elements you'd like to dig deeper on. We will see you very soon. I would like to thank the Cambridge Institute for Music Therapy Research, part of Anglia Ruskin University, and thank you to Chiltern Music Therapy, as well as Yamaha Music London. And of course, Antimo, the pianist.